Hello friends! Today you are gonna learn how to test a React component from scratch. I know you think testing is boring, but it's one of the most underrated parts of development. If you know testing basics, it's a big plus for your career, and you can't imagine how easy to learn it. This tutorial includes everything you need to know about React testing library, Jest, and test-driven development as a beginner. And it's gonna be a real-world example. So we are gonna test React inputs, validations, use state, and async data fetching using mock and more. If you are ready, let's talk about why we need testing. When you create an application, you might say, why would I test my app? I tried and it works perfectly. Well, I'm sorry, but it's not that easy. There is always something wrong. And also, you are not thinking like a user. You already know how your application works. When you open up your application, you write your username, your password, and you wait until be logged in. But in real life, tons of different types of people are gonna visit your website. Maybe some of them don't even know how to use a computer properly. My grandma will visit here. She will see this page and probably gonna destroy this login button without entering any user information, and it's gonna cost you many unnecessary API requests. And also, there are many bad guys out there who look for any little bug in your application. And one more thing that you are probably missing, let's say you have 4 components and each one has 4 different features. It might be any event, any function, doesn't matter. And when you try to create a new one, you realize it affects the other feature here. Okay, it's easy to fix it, that's because we are already in this component, but when you fix it, let's say it affects another one. And when it's down, it's gonna destroy the other one, and maybe another one. This is why testing is not a waste of time. For small projects, it might be, but in the real world, in complex projects, it actually saves your time and increases your productivity. Okay, this small introduction is enough. Let's see how we can test React applications. Okay, as you can see, I created a React app, and here I added this login component. We are gonna test it, but before I want to show you this default app test file. When you create a React app, it comes by default, and it includes a small example inside. Let me run this application, npm start or yarn start. A simple test consists of 3 parts. First one is rendering our components. By the way, we are writing here our description, whatever we want to do in this test. And after, we have to render our component. In this case, it's rendering this app.js. We should render component, otherwise we will not be able to reach any elements in this component. This logo, this text, this link, nothing. Okay, if you render, you are ready for the second step. In this step, we should select a specific HTML element. In this example, it uses this link. But how we are gonna select this? Actually, there are many methods to select an HTML element. We can select this link using its text. We can say basically, hey, find me the HTML element which includes learn React text. Or we can use its role. What I mean by that, let's come here. As you can see, we have image tag, p tag, and we have a link here. So we can ask, find me the HTML element which is a link. Or we can provide any test ID here. And we can say, find the element which includes this test ID. Let's check our example. I'm gonna delete this. And as you can see, firstly, we are using screen object, which comes from testing library. And it represents the whole document which we have rendered. And finally, we are applying this query, get by text. And we are choosing this text here, learn React. So why we are using those slashes and I here? That because it's a regular expression that makes it case insensitive. So if we change any letter here, like that, it's still gonna choose this text. Of course, you can directly write here the text, but in this case, you have to be careful. It's the most common usage, like that. Okay, right now we have the link. We are gonna write here our expectation. I will say expect link element, which we have chosen here, and any method to be in the document. Basically, it checks whether the item exists in the document or not. We are gonna see many other methods. Don't worry about that. Let's run our test. I'm gonna terminate my application. Let's clear here. And I will say npm run test, or if you are using yarn test. And here, I'm gonna press the A button to run all our tests. Actually, we have only one. I will say A. And as you can see, it passed. But if I change here, let's say Angular, I will save. And as you can see, it failed. If I scroll up, and as you can see, this is the error. Unable to find an element with this text because it's Angular. Let's take this back. This time it's successful. Okay, before discovering a real-world example, let's create more tests so you can understand better. So I'm gonna create a list here. I will say ul, and inside li, let's say apple, 2 more, and banana, and maybe orange. I'm gonna save, and I will come here and create another test. Actually, I will copy this and create new one. And my description will be renders 3 list items. And again, I'm gonna render app.js, and after that, I'm gonna choose my list items here because I'm gonna check their length. How we can do that? Let's open up testing library, and as you can see, there are many queries here, and we can use their roles. As you can see, you can give any role and choose it like that, but some elements already have role by default. Let's come here. There is a list here, as you can see, a table of HTML elements with their default roles. I'm gonna click here, and as you can see, anchor tag is a link. What I'm gonna do is searching for list item. Okay, li is here, and as you can see, its role is list item. We can use it. I will say get by role, but since we have more than one item, I should write here get all by role. I'm gonna delete here, and it's gonna be list item. So it's gonna select all our list items. Let's change this variable name, by the way. I'll say list items, and I'm gonna use it here, and I will say to have length, and it's gonna be 3. I will save, and as you can see, it's successful. And it's flexible, so there is no certain rule. It's not the only way. What you can do, you can come here and say list items and length. It's gonna give us 3 again, and I will say to be just 3. I will save again, and as you can see, it's exactly the same thing. Or I can say to equal 3, and again, it's successful. If I change here, it's gonna fail. Perfect. There are many Jest methods. Let's check here, and as you can see, to equal, to contain, to be null, greater than or equal, tons of methods. But don't try to memorize them. We don't have to memorize anything. Just check whatever you need here, and after watching this tutorial, making a couple of small projects, you will be able to write them by heart. Don't worry. And the same thing for testing library. Don't try to memorize any queries here. Just come here and check whatever you need. As you can see, we can use input labels, get by label and username. We can use input placeholders, placeholder username, get by placeholder text. We have already used this text. We can use image alt tags. We can create any title like that. And if you can't find anything, you can use test ID. Actually, let's test it, and maybe this title. I will come here in the app.js, and I'm gonna create here h1 tag. Let's say hello, and let's give a test ID. My test ID. And let's create one more maybe. we can use title. I will say span, and title will be, let's say, sum. So what I'm gonna do is creating here two numbers. I will say const a, let's say 2, and one more is gonna be b, and it can be 4. So I will come here and say a plus b. So it's gonna give us 6. Let's come here. I'm gonna create 2 more tests, and I will say renders title, and it's gonna be my title get by test ID, and remember my test ID. And I'm gonna use it here, title, to be in the document. And what about this? Let's say sum should be 6. Sum screen, and remember we are using title and it's sum. So I will say get by title, and it's gonna be sum. I will say sum, but I need its text content here, this content. So I will say text content, and to be 6. I'm gonna run again, and as you can see, they all have passed. Perfect. It works like that. But let's say I'm expecting 5. And here I write another test ID by mistake. It's gonna happen a lot. And let's say expecting 2 items. And I'm gonna run again. Okay, let's say I want to check my failures. I have to come here. Okay, in this test, I was expecting 5, received 6. I want to see the other one. I have to pass through this huge component. And finally, I can see my mistake. And let's say I realize that I had a mistake, and I will come here and change ID again. And I'm coming back and check for other error. Okay, 2 and 3. And as you realize, it's so messed up here. And just imagine you are testing a huge component and you have maybe 10 failure here. And it will be really overwhelming. This is probably why we don't like testing. But I'm gonna suggest you an awesome extension for that. And it's Wallaby.js. It provides you distraction-free JavaScript testing environment. Let me show you how it's gonna save your time and make your testing much easier. I will come back and I'm gonna close this sidebar, and I'm gonna press on Ctrl, Shift and P buttons. If you are using Mac, Command, Shift and P. And only thing I should do is writing here Wallaby.js and start. It's already here. I'm gonna start. And as soon as you do that, you'll realize our test results are on the screen right now. Let's change this back. And as you can see, the error is here. We don't have to check terminal. We don't have to scroll to see what the problem is. Everything you need to know is here. And it's real time. You don't have to run your test again and again. If you fix this, it's gone. If you make any mistake, it's gonna be here immediately. But the awesome thing is those small squares here. Each square here represents a single line, and it shows us its coverage status. For example, if it's green, that means it's successful. There is no problem here. But here, for example, it's red. That's because our test actually fails. And this one is red too, but it's kinda pink, and it means there is no error here. But since our test has failed, it should be still red. And it's totally red, that's because this is where the problem occurs. And finally, this one is white. That's because we don't have any title, because it's unable to find any element with this test ID. If we don't have any title, we don't need to execute this line. Basically, white means this line isn't covered. And in this test, we don't have any problem for here and here, but in the assertion section, we were expecting 5, but received 6. It's that easy. And next to test, you are gonna notice execution time. Here, here. So there is nothing distractive. Everything is super clear. And especially when you create a complex test, and when it's not easy to follow, you can basically click on View Story. And here it shows everything step by step and focuses on only necessary parts. First, as you can see, it's rendering our application, and it's going to component and reading our variables and our document here. and coming back to the test, selecting our span, and finally in the expectation we have this error. And if you want to be more productive, you should definitely check this out. And let's come here. By the way, I'm gonna show you one more thing. I'm gonna click here, launch coverage, and as you can see it's 25% because only one of them has passed. And you can filter your tests. You can check their execution time. Basically, you can use here any filtering and more details about your tests. Basically, it's an awesome extension for tests. And it's not only for React.js, you can test everything related JavaScript in any code editor, in any framework, and any testing tool. So if you want to get more information and special coupon code with 20% discount, you can check the link in the description below. Okay, before getting started with login test, I want to clear that. Jest versus React testing library. Well, firstly, this is not a versus. This statement is not correct because they are not same things. They actually work together. As I mentioned before, to test our application, we have to reach our DOM elements first. And to reach all those elements, we are using testing library by using those queries. And also, we can interact with our DOM elements, like clicking a button, mouse over any container, basically any JavaScript event. And finally, we don't need any DOM process anymore. We have everything we need. And here is where we need to work with Jest. Jest is a JavaScript testing library. Pay attention, I'm not saying it's for React. You can test vanilla JavaScript, Vue.js, Angular, React, everything that you use JavaScript inside. And it allows us to run our test, and it determines whether the test pass or fail. It takes our expectation and compare with the actual result, and it's called an assertion. Okay, I just wanted to explain that because I see this question a lot. I just wanted to make this clear. Okay, let's make a real world example. This is our login component. As you can see, it's empty. Like that, we have 2 inputs and 1 button here. There is no event, there is no placeholder, no login functionality, nothing. Why I'm doing this? That because we are gonna apply test-driven development. It's a software development process that we should write our test first and then create every elements and functions in our application. So far, we have created our elements first and test them later. But for now, we are in the real world scenario and we will use this method. It's really important and super popular. Why it's important is it allows us to focus on the user interaction first. We will think like a normal user and we are gonna try to find out possible mistakes. We will make the mistake first. We will see that our test fails and after we are gonna build the working version. So let's create our test. Let me make this bigger like that. And I'm gonna come here and create my test file. login.test.js. Okay, let's delete actually everything here and let's get started. I will say test. Username input should be rendered. Okay, let's render our component, which is login, like that. And after that, we are gonna reach our username input. To do that, we can use placeholder text maybe. Let's do that. I will say const user input element, and it's gonna be screen object, which comes from testing library. And I will say get by placeholder text, and it's gonna be username, like that. And finally, let's write our expectation. I will say user input element to be in the document, like that. And I'm gonna do the same thing for password input and button. Let's say password input element, and it's gonna be password placeholder, and finally button. And here, of course, we are not gonna use placeholder. What we can use, let's say get by role. And button role is just a button, like that. So if I run my application, as you can see, every task has failed. if I come here, if you are not using this extension, don't worry. I'm gonna also run this here. And all fails are here. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, only thing I should do is coming here and creating my elements like that. But we don't have any placeholder. Let's create, it's gonna be username. And it's gonna be password. And finally a button. We don't need anything else. I will save. And right now, as you can see, they have passed like that. Awesome. Actually, I can create new terminal here, and right now I can say npm or yarn test. Okay, it looks better. So we have our elements here, and let's think like a user again. What we are expecting when we open this login page? We are expecting that all inputs are already empty. So what I'm gonna do is copying this username input and pasting here. By the way, it's not gonna be input, it's just a button like that. Okay. And I'm gonna say username input should be empty. So what I'm gonna do is coming here and giving for this username a value. Let's say username. I will do the same thing for password. And in this case, as you can see, they are not empty. Right now we are gonna test them. User input dot value to be empty. Empty string. As you can see, there is an error. If I save, as you can see, our error is here. And I'm gonna do the same thing for password. Let's duplicate this. Password input should be empty. Password input element and password. Expected empty string and received password. And it's here. Right now we know where the error is. We are gonna go there and correct our mistakes. And right now they've passed. So let's come back. Everything is okay. But as you can see, our login button is clickable. I don't have username or password, but I can still click. And imagine that for every click you are making an API request. So it's gonna be really expensive for us. What we need to do is disabling this button. So I'm gonna come here. Let's take this button. And I will say button should be disabled. I'm gonna choose my button and I will say to be disabled like that. And received element is not disabled. I'm gonna save, and you can see here also like that. Let's come here and correct disabled. It's gonna be true for now, and as you can see, it's disabled. And what else we can do? We can create an error message here. After login process, if there's an error, we are gonna write here span and something went wrong. Of course, I'm using a style, but I didn't want to show you. I don't want to waste time by writing any CSS, but you are gonna see this in the GitHub repository. So what we are expecting as a user, when we open up this login page, we are not supposed to see this error message. Let's make this test. Let's duplicate this. And error message should be invisible, or should not be visible. I'm gonna choose my error message. To do that, let's give here test ID, and it's gonna be error. Let's select this. Error element, screen, get by test ID, and it's gonna be error. And what I'm gonna do is writing here not too visible. And this is really important, guys. You can directly write here .not, and I'm gonna run, and you can see here received element is visible. Okay, I know where the mistake is. Right now I can correct. So what I can do, basically I can create a use state here. I'll say const error set error and use state hook, and at the beginning it's gonna be false. And according to this state we can update our span here, and I'm gonna write here a style, and I will say visibility. If there's an error, it's gonna be visible, If there is no error, it's gonna be hidden. And if I save my page, oops, there is a typo here, visibility. And now, as you can see, it has passed. Perfect. And what else I can do? When I write here any username and password, those inputs should take them as a value. Basically, we are gonna apply onChange event. Let's copy this. Username and password. And username input should change. And for password, it's gonna be username, by the way, username input element. It doesn't matter, but it looks better, I think. Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is creating my states for username and password. Let's say password and set password. At the beginning, it's gonna be an empty string, and for username, it's gonna be the same, like that. Let's take this here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is assigning their values here. That's because when we change any input, we are gonna set our username and password. That's how we are storing our credentials. And after that, we are gonna send them to our API. So I will say username, and it's gonna be password. So let's simulate onChange event here. What I'm gonna do is creating here a test value. I will say const test value, and it's gonna be, let's say, test. It's basically what we are writing inside this input. And remember, we are just testing, so we cannot take anything from browser. We are just simulating, so it should be any fake data here. In this case, it's gonna be test value. So what I'm gonna do is creating here a fire event, and it's gonna be change event. I'm gonna take my username input, and I'm gonna give a target and value, as we always do in our components. I will say target, and its value will be this test value. So what I expect that my user input value is my test value, because whenever I write something here, it should be stored inside this input. But actually it's not that, because we are receiving empty string like that. And I'm gonna do the same thing for password. So I'm gonna come here, test value, and it's gonna be password input element, and exactly the same thing. Okay, we see that our tests failed, so we can go there and correct them. What I'm gonna do is just creating here onChange method, onChange event, and it's gonna take the event, set username, it's gonna be event, target, and value. Let's do the same thing for password. I'm gonna paste, and this time it's gonna be set password, like that. If I save, as you can see, they passed. Perfect. And here, as you can see, they are green. In this case, they are working, but there's a problem here, that because it's still disabled. So let's test it. I will copy this button, paste it here. Button should not be disabled when inputs exist. And here we have to simulate user action again. I will take a username here. I will take the password, and I'm gonna fire event for both of them. We are just simulating. I will say username input element. If username and password have value, it shouldn't be disabled. So I will say not to disabled. But as you can see, it has failed. Element is disabled. Element is disabled. Let's come here quickly and correct that. I'm gonna write here a condition. I will say if there is no username or if there is no password, it should be disabled. And right now, as you can see, it has passed. Perfect. Right now we can create the login functionality. Let's come here, and I will say on click event, and when we click on this button, it's gonna fire handle click function. Let's create this here. I will say const handle click. I'm gonna take event and e.prevent default. If you are watching my tutorials, you already know why we are using this. So what we can do, Of course, we are not going to create any server or something. I'm just going to make a fake login process here. Let's say async try catch block. And if there's an error, our set error will be true. And here, let's find a fake API. To do that, we are going to use JSON placeholder. It's really easy to use. Let's find here any user. As you can see, it brings 10 users, but if I say users and its ID, it's going to give me just one user. So I can use this URL and fetch this data. To do that, we are going to use Axios. Let's say yarn add or npm install Axios. Of course, you can use JavaScript fetch, but in most cases, I'm using Axios, so I'm not going to change it. I just want to make it more realistic. So what I can say, I'll say data, and I'm going to make my request. I'll say axios.get method, and I'm going to write this fake API URL, and it's going to return us a user. And after that, I'm going to update my user. But we don't have yet. Let's create user, set user, and at the beginning, it's going to be an empty object. We don't have any user yet. But after this data, I can update this, set user, and it's going to be data. But how we can show this user? Let's use it here. Maybe after container, I'll say span user and user.name, this user. Of course, in the real world, we are going to fetch from any server, Node.js server or Firebase or whatever you say. But in this case, we don't need them. It's exactly the same thing. It returns a user. That's all. Okay, so let's come here and let's think what we can do. I'm going to close here. When I write here something like that, and when I click on this button, I want to see here a progress circle or wait please text or something like that. Basically, I just want a loading button. I can say another state is going to be loading, set loading, and at the beginning it's going to be false. So I can write here a condition. I'll say if it's loading, just write here, I don't know, please wait. If it's not, just write login. And as you can see, it's still login, and we can test it, by the way. At the beginning, I will say loading should not be rendered. It's gonna be our button again, but this time I'm gonna write another method here. It shouldn't include that please wait text. To do that, I will write to have text content, and it's gonna be please wait. And after that, after clicking this button, it should be rendered. And click. And again, I'm gonna simulate this interaction. I'm gonna copy here and paste, and I'm gonna fire one more event here, and it's gonna be click event. Fire event is gonna be our button, and after that we are gonna test our loading text. To do that, of course, it's not gonna be not anymore, and as you can see, it has failed. That because we didn't add that functionality. By the way, it shows another error here. We don't have name. I forgot await here. Of course, we should await this. Okay, let's check right now. Okay, this time it says we were expecting please wait, but it says login. Let's fix this. I will say after clicking this button, I'm gonna make this loading. It's gonna be true. And if I save, and if I write here something and login, and as you can see, it's please wait. But it's not ending, it's still please wait. So what I'm gonna do is, after fetching operation, setting my loading again, and it's gonna be false. But before testing that, what we are gonna do is creating our Axios mock. That because, as I said, we cannot take anything from browser or we cannot take anything from backend server. So we have to have to simulate everything. So in this case, we are not able to use this Axios call here. Technically, of course, you can copy this and paste here and test your username. But in this case, imagine your backend server just down and your test is gonna fail every time. There is nothing wrong with your test, but it's gonna fail because it depends on your backend server. It shouldn't depend on anything. That's why simulating is really important. In this case, we are gonna use mock. I'm gonna open my sidebar. In the source folder, I'm gonna create new folder and it's gonna be __ mocks __. And inside, I will say axios.js. It's really important. It should be exactly the same thing what you are using to fetch your data. In this case, it's gonna be Axios. So basically, you can create your Jest mock here. You can say jest.mock, but if you do that, it's gonna be available for all your tests. We are just testing login page, but imagine you are testing users, posts, comments, whatever. So I don't want to do this here. I'm gonna come here and at the beginning, I'm gonna use jest.mock. And it's gonna be Axios and a callback here. And we are gonna decide what it's gonna return us by default. I will say default, and inside which method we are using, it's gonna be get method. Remember, axios.get. And I will say, and it's gonna return us our data. Let's say data, whatever you say, ID 1, name John, surname, address, whatever you want to test. But we need only this name, that because we are using it right here. You don't need anything else. But there's an important thing here. Since we are using AS6 or above, we have to write here __ ES modules, and it's gonna be true. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. It's important. Okay, we have fetching simulation. What we can do is copying this test and pasting again. And loading should not be rendered or visible, whatever you say, after fetching. And what I'm gonna do is adding here async. That because we are gonna make our login request, and it's gonna be, of course, async. And what I'm gonna do is adding not here, and we are gonna wait for this button. That because when we click, it's gonna write please wait. After a couple milliseconds, it's gonna return us this user, and again, it's gonna turn back to login. And it's gonna take time. It means we should await it. And if you are waiting aspect, you should write here wait for, and inside I'm gonna put this aspect. Let's delete this semicolon. Okay, let's import this. It's coming from testing library, and that's all. I'm gonna save, and as you can see, it has failed. Expected not to have this, but we have received that because after login process, we didn't set our loading. Set loading, and it's gonna be false again. If I do that, as you can see, it has passed. And let's refresh the page. I'm gonna write here something. I'm gonna log in, please wait, and again, login. And we have a user right now. Perfect. And finally, let's test this user and end our tutorial. I'm gonna copy here, and what I'm gonna say, I will say user should be rendered after fetching. Again, login, all those events. We are gonna await our user here. But in the test, remember, it's not this name. It returns us John. So in this case, our spam will be John. So what I can do, I'm gonna come here and I will say const user item, and it's gonna be await screen object find by text, and it's gonna be John. And pay attention here, I'm not using get by text, that's because it's an async query. You cannot use this here. As you can see, it says get by text query is not async. So we have to write here find by text. And after that, we don't need here anymore. Like that. And we can use this user item and to be in the document. Like that. But if I run this, it's gonna be correct. So I'm gonna comment this out. I will run. And as you can see, it failed. And it says unable to find an element with the text John. We don't have it yet. But if I open this, as you can see, it's working. Perfect. I hope you understood. We can make endless examples here, but it was enough, I think. Right now you know the basics. And that's all. If you want more testing videos, just let me know in the comment. I hope you liked it. If you learned something new today, please like the video. And you can support Lama Dev by joining the channel or using the link in the description below. I hope I will see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye.